The adult portion of today's teaching is actually in response to a letter that I got from one of my students. And the letter that I got from one of my students, actually I'm extremely grateful for, because it made me realize that one of my most annoying characteristics and tactics is probably right on the money. One of the most annoying things about having me as a teacher is that often I will take a certain subject and I will teach it again and again and again. And I've even heard my students say to me, "Gee, it's another teaching on compassion. How nice." Or something like that, where they'll indicate to me that they've heard that teaching many times before and they'd like to move on to something greater and more profound. But my tendency has been to think that if I give a teaching again and again and again and I still don't see the result or the milk of that teaching come forth, then it's my job, my responsibility, to teach it again and again and again until I see the result. And I've always told the students that when I see you display the characteristic or the particular quality that I'm giving the teaching on, then I'll be happy to stop teaching it. So I have had that habit of making teachings again and again and again about the same subject. One of those subjects is devotion. Now, the background for this letter that I received from the student is that I sent a message to the student that I'm going to not mention the student's name or gender, sent a message to the student saying that their particular problem was that they didn't have enough bodhicitta, or compassion, and that they really had to beef up the compassion. They really had to accomplish compassion, and that was the main problem. So the student got their courage up and wrote me a letter saying that while they agreed that they did have a problem with compassion, that in fact that was not their big problem. Their big problem was a lack of devotion. It's just a little bit of arrogance perhaps, but anyway. So there was a disagreement in a perspective there. So, which is fine. So the student said that they had not enough devotion, and that really was the big problem, and that what they really wanted was to feel close to the teacher all the time, to feel sympathetic to the teacher all the time, and just different kinds of, the student described different kinds of feelings that they would like to have about their teacher. And when I read the letter, I realized just what a perfect demonstration it was of what I had said to the student. What I said to the student was that the student did not have enough bodhicitta, did not have enough compassion. And I believe firmly that I was right on the money. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that particular interchange as a way to demonstrate to you something more about devotion and how it should actually look, how it should actually be displayed when it is really firm, and particularly also about bodhicitta and how these two concepts actually relate. The big mistake that students make is that they feel that they're supposed to have a feeling. This isn't an uncommon thing amongst sentient beings, amongst human beings. Human beings are always confused by feelings. We feel as though we're supposed to feel a certain way, and that feeling is wrong. We have an idea or a concept in our minds as to what life is supposed to feel like, and we don't realize how programmed we are and how ridiculous these assumptions can be, because they are based on misconception, and in many cases they are simply fed to us by some idea that someone else might have had at some time, or just through a set of strange circumstances that have come to us at different times. One kind of far-out example that I would like to use is that there are so many cultural feelings that we have, cultural bias that we have about the way we should look, the way we should act, how we should feel, how happy we should be, how that happiness should seem, how our relationships should be, how our family should be, how we should dress, all kinds of different ideas, just what our characteristics should be like. And this cultural bias, of course, would be different in each culture. Perhaps a culture in Africa, let's say, in the bush, that really wasn't acquainted with modern world, would have an entirely different set of norms, a different set of ideas than what we might have in our culture, and they might be 180 degrees away from one another. But we are so highly programmed that there are many times that we are not satisfied with our lives and our situations and our relationships and our appearances simply because we are programmed not to be. And it really is very far from a natural inclination or feeling. It's actually a programmed feeling. In our society, because we are a capitalistic and materialistic society, and I am, believe me, not getting political here, I am not arguing with capitalism or materialism, I'm just making a point. In our society, we are told what we're going to like for the upcoming year. I mean, this actually happens. People get together and they decide what's going to be in fashion next year. And then they program you to like it and buy it. Don't you think that's true? Oh, absolutely, it's true. And how much you are willing to go along with that may dictate on some subtle, unconscious level how you feel about yourself the next year. Even if you are a rebel and you don't go along with all this stuff, it's going to affect how you think of yourself when you look in the mirror or when you look at your life. On some subtle level, we are really programmed in that way. So, on the level of looking to see what emotions actually are and how we respond to them, we have to think like that. We have to think how emotions are like dew on grass, and how much in the light of reason, if one were to actually see the facts and reevaluate things, emotions often disappear just like that. And that's so also in the case of the emotion of devotion. Students feel that they are supposed to feel a certain way. They are waiting for a feeling. They are expectant. They have an expectant attitude toward that feeling. Often they will not really sincerely consider themselves a Dharma practitioner, or will not meditate properly, or will not take their practice in hand because they are waiting for a feeling. They are waiting for the feeling to tell them what to do. In light of what I've just said about such feelings, isn't that a bit ridiculous? One has to make more solid choices than that, particularly about one's spiritual progress. One has to make more solid choices than that, particularly about the rest of one's life, about one's happiness, about one's ability to achieve realization. Even though I say these words to you, probably some of you at least will come to me at some point and say, well, I don't really have the right feeling for this. I don't really understand whether I want to be a Buddhist yet. I don't really have the feeling for it. Or even if you don't want to be a Buddhist, which is fine with me. I'm not an evangelical sort of person. They might come and say, well, you know, I like everything you say, but I don't really know if I feel that you're my teacher. Okay, well, whatever. I like everything you say. I like what you stand for. I like your qualities. I like your ability to teach me. I can understand what you say very well. We have great communication, and all the information is available because of your teachings. But I don't know if I like you as my teacher. Or perhaps I don't like the way you do your hair. That's another thing. So we have all these different kinds of feelings that come up, and we wait. We hold our lives in certain strange positions, waiting for certain feelings to appear. And it's a very odd thing to do. From the point of view of Dharma, these feelings are utterly meaningless. If one were to examine the feelings, one would see that feelings change from moment to moment, don't they? Haven't you noticed that about yourself? Let's take a very simple and very common occurrence. Have you ever taken account as to how you feel about your life, or at least about that day, or about some particular incident when you're hungry? and then after eating your lunch or your dinner and satisfying your hunger, take another account as to how you feel about your life or your particular circumstance, and notice that the food in your stomach can change entirely how you feel about everything? Have you ever noticed that? Any of you that have ever had perhaps enough hunger to have your blood sugar be low or some silly thing like that? Have you ever noticed that you feel entirely different about the same subject early in the morning as you do late at night? All of these things are feelings that we've had, and we've noticed that we change feelings like we change socks, probably more often. It's amazing. It's just amazing, and yet we persevere in jilting ourselves by waiting for a feeling. Those feelings are as nebulous, as unsubstantiated as they could possibly be. The feeling of devotion, actually, from the point of view of Dharma, is pretty useless. I've given this instance before, and I'm going to have to go ahead and give it again. I don't know how many times I have seen students walk through the door and tell me that they are greatly affected by this place. Oh, so greatly affected, they're having this absolutely earth-shattering experience. And they are so utterly moved to their bones by this place. And then they meet me and they go, oh, and I know I am utterly moved by you, and everything is so utterly moving, and they have this big experience of whatever it is, but it's big, and it's just happening, and they get all teary-eyed and kind of carrying on and everything. And when they tell me that, I really don't respond very much. I kind of say, thank you very much, I'm really glad you're having a good time, and I don't make such a big deal about it, because I know that 10 minutes from now the feeling could be over, or a week from now, or a month from now. It's like paper. Burns hot and fast, and then it's gone. Nothing but cold ash. So those kind of feelings may not be too much, unless you can, like paper, increase the flame or make the flame last by adding wood, lightweight wood, and then by adding after lightweight wood you add heavier wood, and then after heavier wood you add coal, or something that burns for a long time, some heavy oak, and pretty soon you have a fire that burns for a long time and can remain. What are these things that you can add that are more stable? Thought. You can add some thought. The students that come and have these big moving experiences are not necessarily the ones that stick it out. In fact, often is the case that they are not, because you don't constantly feed that adrenaline high or whatever it is they're having. It simply won't last. It's not solid enough. The thing that really lasts is consideration, thought, something more stable than these feelings that change moment by moment. Frankly, it really doesn't matter how you feel about me in a personal way. The student doesn't even have to like the teacher, doesn't have to like the teacher's personality, doesn't have to like the way the teacher presents themselves. This is the consideration that is far more important than whether or not you like the way the teacher wears their clothing or their robes, or blow dries their hair or shaves their head or whatever. What really has to be considered is whether or not you yourself have come to examine the faults of cyclic existence, whether or not you yourself have seen that you have been born and therefore you will die, whether or not you have seen that you'd like to make the best use of the time that you have in between. You have to decide for yourself whether or not you can see that, like the Buddha said, samsara, or cyclic death and rebirth, is filled with suffering. That while you may be happy at any given time, still, cyclic existence has a lot of suffering in it. There is always old age, sickness, and death, even on the human realm. If you look around you, all you have to do is read the paper. You don't have to be smart, you just have to read the paper. Look at the world's history. Look around you and you can see that there is suffering everywhere. You don't even have to have a creative kind of understanding. You can have a very literal kind of understanding in order to see that. You can look at your own life and you can see that happiness has been temporary and fleeting. And that there have always been times of extreme discomfort or suffering. So having seen that, you can decide for yourself that samsara is not the way to go, that cyclic existence is no place to feel stable and to remain without trying to make a change. And from that point of view, we begin to look around and see for ourselves, if this is true of me, is it also true that all sentient beings experience suffering? And so looking around, you can very easily see that it is so. In our ngundro, our preliminary practice, we are asked to examine for ourselves the different kinds of human beings that there are and their particular circumstances. We're born in pretty nice circumstances, all things considered. I mean, I don't know exactly where you were born, but I don't remember going hungry for too many days. I feel like, even though there has been suffering in my life, altogether things are not so bad. But if you look around you, that is not true of all human beings. Having myself traveled to other countries, I have seen that there is death and sickness untreated and uncared for in the streets. That there is hatred, that there is prejudice, that there is lack of understanding of our equality. And all of these things have brought tremendous suffering. And if we look at the animal realms, we can see that they suffer intensely, that animals are at the victim of survival instinct. Smaller animals are eaten by bigger animals. Bigger animals are eaten by bigger animals yet. They are all victims of hunger. Animals that are captured or used and abused for their strength, or perhaps eaten for their flesh. So there is a great deal of suffering. And the Buddha teaches us that there are also non-physical realms in which there is also suffering. So we examine that for ourselves and we see that there are these particular circumstances. And this has nothing to do with emotion. You don't have to like what you hear or not like what you hear. It doesn't matter, really, the emotional impact these things have on you. It's the logic of it that really holds out. It's the logic that really matters. And so when we take a teacher, when we accept a teacher, we do so because that teacher is qualified to present to us in some way the philosophy and practice of Dharma. Dharma is the path. Dharma is actually the teaching of the Buddha that can lead us from cyclic existence, from samsara, into enlightenment. Now that has to be examined very carefully too, because there are many spiritual teachers. And in America's spiritual supermarket, they're selling a lot of baloney these days. And you have to think about that. You have to think about whether it would be wise to practice a philosophy that is as yet unproven. Because there are many so-called spiritual teachers who have had some kind of inspiration and they've just begun to teach something. But their teachings have been around maybe 20 years, maybe 50 years, usually less. And they have not yet, even once, produced enlightenment. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm going to cross the ocean of suffering, I'm going to do so in a boat that has no holes in it. I'm going to do so in a boat that has crossed before and has made the journey. And so in that way, I look to a system that has proven itself. And so that's one of the reasons, actually, why I feel so strongly about the Buddha Dharma, is because it has produced the result of enlightenment repeatedly with signs and markable results again and again and again. So in that way, I am looking to practice Dharma. I am looking to practice Dharma for the sake of sentient beings in order to exit suffering, in order to exit samsara, in order to exit cyclic existence. And to tell you the truth, there are times when I don't like to practice Dharma. There are times when I don't like, there are many times when I don't like to teach Dharma. There are many times when it doesn't suit my personality There are many times when I would rather be doing something else. But what to do? The only sensible, logical, and reasonable thing to do is to stick with a system that actually works. So when you choose what you're going to do in terms of your practice, you should really choose something that makes sense, that is reasonable in its assumption that it is going to produce the optimum result. You want only one result, and that result must be enlightenment, because enlightenment is the only true cessation of suffering. It is the only true enabler that can actually enable you to achieve the result of enlightenment and therefore benefit sentient beings. So having made such a choice, we look to find a teacher that can produce that opportunity. What is the teacher that can produce that opportunity? Who is that teacher? The teacher should be authorized to give such teachings, qualified to give such teachings, able to communicate those teachings not from a point of simply technique, but also from a point of wisdom, having themselves accomplished those teachings. Sort of speaking from the other side, having made accomplishment. And, very important, that teachers should be able to speak our language in a way that is reachable for us. If we were to have a teacher that we couldn't really understand due to language or due to just a difference in the way the mind functions, a difference that sometimes happens that way, that a teacher can give a perfectly good teaching and it can be either translated or spoken very well, but somehow the way that the teacher gives it doesn't quite come together in our minds. But another teacher can give a teaching in such a way that turns the light on. Suddenly there is an insightfulness. And it's very clear and it's very simple, what we could not understand before. So that's another qualification. It has to be reachable for us. It has to be understandable. If these qualifications are met, if the teacher either themselves provides or secures for us every empowerment, teaching, and opportunity that is necessary, according to our karma and according to our ability, then that is a suitable teacher. And for that reason, we should feel devotion. The devotion is based on those assumptions, those understandings, those logical perceptions. One needn't necessarily feel to be constantly close to the teacher on a human or ordinary level. Did you know that? I guess every student has this idea that they kind of wish they were in their teacher's back pocket, you know? That they were just so close to their teacher that they could really have, I don't know, sit around and, I don't know, have dinner with their teacher, or, I don't know, drink tea together, or have meaningful, loving experiences on a regular basis, or have the teacher come to their house and be part of their family, or vice versa, you know, wish that they were part of the teacher's life in some very personal, intimate way. First of all, that's not necessary. And in some cases, it can actually be a detriment. The teacher will choose very carefully who can be close to them, according to the karma of the student and according to the student's ability. That will be chosen very carefully with great care if the teacher is responsible. And the reason why is that in some cases, intimacy, those things that we all crave to be so close to our teachers, can be a detriment to our practice. And the reason why is that we cannot maintain pure view. We don't have the capability of maintaining pure view. We always get sucked into the human ordinary part, the appearance, the display, and lose sight of the fundamental meaning of the relationship between student and teacher. So that feeling to want to be so close to your teacher, to be so intimate with your teacher, to have this really personal kind of warm, fuzzy relationship with the teacher is really a mistaken idea. You should rely on the teacher's instruction as to how to maintain the relationship. You should really rely on the teacher's discretion. If the teacher does not bring you close, you should just live with that. If the teacher brings you close, then you've got a lot of work to do. And maybe you better hope they don't. Because suddenly your life has become much more complicated than you thought. So these things are not what they appear to be. We're waiting for this feeling, this very human feeling. Now we have to understand why it is that we do wait for that feeling, why it is that we feel that way. There's only one reason why we feel as we do about devotion and how it ought to feel. And that's because we have a human habit. It's only habitual tendency. Through our life experience, not only in this life, but in other lives as well, we have this idea of what things ought to feel like. And that idea is based on habit patterns. According to our habits, we will feel that way. Some people feel that they have to... You ever notice this about some people? They kind of feel like in order to communicate, they have to get right up to you, like in your face like that. And they talk to you and they look into your eyes like, you know, and they get real intimate and kind of fuzzy with you and everything. You know what I'm talking about? You ever met a person like that? Does that annoy you as much as it annoys me? Drives me out of my mind. But anyway, let's leave that aside. They sort of get up in people have the habit of getting up in your face and having a meaningful experience with everybody. And it's because it's their habit to do so. It's simply their habit. Somehow, over time, they have developed this habit of being either very effusive or very intimate or very close. In some cases, it's a cultural thing. Some cultures believe in standing very close when they communicate. And in some cases, it's just plain individual habit. And then other people feel that they have to be very articulate, very verbose, that they have to describe in vast, incredible, eloquent detail everything that is happening in their minds at every given moment to everyone they know well. And so their habit is to have a relationship with a teacher that's extremely communicative. This can also be another annoying thing, but anyway, it really isn't necessary in terms of one's Dharma practice. It really isn't necessary, and sometimes can be a tremendous impediment, can be an encumberment, because it doesn't make the student-teacher relationship pristine and clear and pure. It doesn't make the auspicious interactions possible in a very pure way, meaning that when it comes time for the student and teacher to interact, they can't do so effectively. There's a lot of mess to get through. Kind of like trying to climb through a forest of peripheral ideas and communications. One cannot really act in a very cutting way. That means cutting to the bone and seeing the thing purely and truly. There's a lot of encumberment. And so that can be an impediment. Now other students feel as though they have to be rugged individuals, you know. They have to keep their distance because that is my way. That is my thing. And I am used to being kind of like either the male or female version of the Marlboro Man, the rugged individualist, you know. Diamond in the rough. Can't be tied down. You know the type. Now, perhaps that's an interesting characteristic sometimes. At least it can be a very romantic one, especially if you live in like Texas or something. But from the point of view of Dharma, that may also turn out to be an encumbrance. Supposing you have the capacity to learn something by some kind of personal or intimate interaction with the teacher, and you can't take that opportunity because you have this Marlboro Man idea in your head. That may also be true. Devotion does not appear like any of those crazy ideas that we have. These are just more crazy ideas. We have so many of them. We have a storehouse of crazy ideas about every subject in the universe. Dharma is only one of them. Devotion is only one of them. And at some point, in order to practice effectively, we really simply have to let these things go. And for some people, that's a very painful process, because they're so fixated on the idea that a relationship ought to be a certain way. Particularly in the case where the student feels as though they need a certain level of approval. They're always wanting approval or feedback or something, some kind of juicy stuff, you know, some kind of approval mostly. And so in order to really be honest and pure and true in your relationship with the Guru, you have to let go of that. And that can be a very uncomfortable process for the student that is used to basing their whole lives really on getting some kind of interpersonal power, you know what I mean, or approval, or something like that that feeds them in a personality way. That can be a very difficult thing to let go of. And the polar opposite of that perhaps would be that it would be a difficult thing to break the habit of the rejection of intimacy, you know, the rugged individualist idea, and practice surrender as one must do, really, with devotion. Surrender to the truth of the relationship, not to the personality guru, but to the truth of the relationship. That surrender must be practiced, and in the case of the Marlborough man, that may be very difficult. And so there's a tremendous impediment to the practice. But in any way, devotion really has nothing to do with feeling. When we, as ordinary Americans not practicing Dharma, think of devotion, that's difficult for us, because devotion to us means something like what dogs do, you know, when they bring their master's slipper or something, I don't know what, but their devotion is a feeling. We're supposed to feel a lot of devotion. We're supposed to have this kind of feeling, and in some cases, that feeling that devotion must be a feeling is itself a problem, in that one also feels that one has to be something of a wimp to really feel devotion. One has to really put one's own strength aside to feel devotion in that way. None of those things are true. All of that is just total malarkey. None of that is true. Devotion, actually, for the student that wrote me the letter, is based on bodhicitta, or compassion. When one gives rise to the idea of compassion, having examined cyclic existence and seen that it is faulted, having understood the teaching that there is an end to suffering, and that end comes about through the practice of Dharma, and that end comes about by achieving enlightenment, and that one can benefit others in terms of ending their suffering by returning again and again and again for the benefit of sentient beings, for others, through accomplishing one's own enlightenment and then helping others to accomplish enlightenment. When one really understands those teachings, the teacher becomes the most precious jewel in one's life. You don't have to like the teacher or feel close to the teacher or know how to talk to the teacher or like the way the teacher dresses or have an idea about the teacher or even be in the same country as the teacher. The teacher becomes the door to liberation, is understood as the means by which you can get the teaching, by which you can deepen the mind. The teacher is understood as the facilitator. In the same way that to exit a burning room, one must go through the door. Suddenly the door becomes very precious. The door becomes the main love of your life. You know, if you're in a burning room and there's one way to get out and it's through a certain door, how do you feel about that door? Totally focused. Totally focused. Like you never loved anything in your life as much as you loved that door. You are into the door. Isn't that true? And you have a little fire starting to burn on your behind. Don't you love the door that you're going to get out of that room and through? That's how you feel about your teacher. Like that. You don't stop and say, well, you know, I like doors that have kind of like glass panes in them, maybe with a little etching and frosting. No. Stained glass with a little color on it. How about that? And I like the wood to be kind of dark oak. No, I like light blonde wood. When your behind is burning, you don't think like that. You think out. Out. I want out. I want to achieve liberation. And that's how one considers the teacher. Period. It's not a personality cult. It's not a personality cult. When you think about the teacher, you think that, in essence, this is the appearance of Guru Rinpoche, or the very mind of enlightenment in the world, because that is the way through which I might enter the door of liberation. There's the teaching, there's the opportunity, there's the teacher's capability to ripen my mind and deepen my mind, sitting right there. Therefore, I'm going for it. That's what I want. I'm totally fixated on that. That's what I want. It's not based on whether or not you like the person. It doesn't really matter. Who really cares? A pure teacher really is not here to be liked. Doesn't really much care. That's not the point. And it doesn't so much matter how you feel, so long as you go through the door. That's all the teacher cares about. That's all you should care about. Also, you need to have looked at cyclic existence to understand its faults, but then you must also see that all sentient beings do suffer in cyclic existence, and that's not hard. You can figure that out in about a week. All you have to do is look around, read the paper, watch TV, ask people. Just look for yourself. Having examined cyclic existence and having determined for yourself that all sentient beings are suffering, suddenly there must be some compassion that comes in your heart. There must be something. And especially when the Buddha teaches us that we have lived so many times that all sentient beings have actually at some time or another been our parents. So we call them motherly sentient beings. That we have arrived at this auspicious moment in time where we can practice Dharma, and we have done so through the gateway, really, of having been born again and again and again. And the Buddha teaches us, born through all of these sentient beings. So they are our kind mothers. They are all equal. Another thing about sentient beings is that they all want to be happy. Have you ever noticed that about them? All sentient beings want to be happy. They have strange ways of showing it. Even like robbers, killers, murderers, cruel people, in their twisted thinking, they think that that kind of power that they get from what they do will make them happy. In their twisted thinking, in their deep neuroses, they are trying to be happy. Everyone is trying to be happy, no matter what they do. So you can look at a person whose behavior you don't understand at all, and you can say, well, I don't know you very well, but one thing I know about you is that you are trying to be happy. And we're all the same in that. That is our common sentient beingness that we have together. And the tragedy of that is that each of us in our nature, from the lowest worm to the highest king and queen, we are equal. We are equal. We all have the Buddha nature. We all have the potential to ripen that Buddha nature. We are equal. It's not enough to say that all human beings are equal, like all cultures and races and religions and stuff like that. Who cares? That's old. We know that already. But that all sentient beings are equal, that means the mosquito that bites you is the same as you, equal to you. So you can't kill him anymore. Can't swat him. You have to say, Om Mani Padme Hum, and blow him off like that. And pray for his rebirth in an auspicious way. All sentient beings are equal, absolutely all. So that being the case, suddenly the teacher becomes even more precious, because not only you are dependent on your teacher, but everyone that you know, that you have a connection with, that you can someday return in order to liberate, once you achieve realization. Those who have hopes of you, they also indirectly depend on your teacher. And so the teacher becomes even more important out of kindness. And so the devotion becomes sharp, pure, pristine, free of delusion, free of the delusion of emotion. Because emotion is so inconsequential, because it is so impermanent, and because it just doesn't really matter. Emotion is just a display of ego. It's just a display of the horrendous habit of conceptualization that we all have. It doesn't matter. What matters is the giving birth to, the giving rise to the bodhicitta. That is what matters, more than anything. I am very fortunate in that I have a wonderful love story that I can tell about my guru, one of my gurus. In my life, I naturally came to meditation and taught myself to meditate by praying to receive that teaching, and it came to me naturally. That you can't count on that happening, but in my case it did. And I practiced something that's very much like a form of chud, a certain practice that one practices in the Tibetan tradition, in the Buddhist tradition, where one offers one's body, speech, and mind in order to be of benefit to sentient beings. I practiced that for years before I even met my teacher, and I didn't know that it was a traditional practice. But I just found in my mind that all sentient beings were suffering, and it seemed to me that in order for me to be useful, I would have to be not just holding on to my own ego nature, but I would have to try to display the capacity of enlightenment wherever I was. So I began to practice in that way, and students started to come to me. I never actually formally gathered them, but they actually just started coming. So all of that happened, and I had a meditation center, and I was already teaching, and all these things were going on, and I hadn't met my teacher yet. I was hoping that I would, but I hadn't met my teacher yet. And yet I just had the audacity to go ahead and do this thing. Well, the audacity was based on the fact that I just couldn't sit around and wait while everybody was suffering. It just didn't seem reasonable to me. And I understood that they were suffering in their minds, so I just thought I'd start and teach them some of the good results that I'd had. Anyway, it worked out that at some point, after I had already started a center, through a certain set of circumstances, His Holiness Pena Rinpoche came from India to America and met me. And it was an amazing thing. It was through 2 or 3 different connections that it happened. But apparently he heard of me and said, I want to go and see her. How amazing. Because when he came to me, he told me that he asked me a lot about my teachings and asked me what it was I was teaching, and he asked my students what they were learning from me. And then he told me that I was teaching Buddhism. And I didn't know that I was a Buddhist. I was like, Buddhist? What's a Buddhist? I had no idea. I knew nothing about Buddhism, nothing. And then when I heard that, I somehow felt right. It felt that must be so. It felt right to me. But the amazing love story, the thing that's so amazing about it, is that in his purity and his kindness, he was able to somehow find me, connect with me, from India, South India yet. I mean, that's way the heck out there, you know? And he was able to come to America, to Kensington, Maryland, which is where I lived at the time, and come to my living room and tell me that I was a Buddhist. You have to rely on a teacher like that, you know? You have to think that that's something miraculous, amazing, that could happen, that the teacher could come into your life in that way and just speak to you and help you to understand what it is that you're doing when you were just doing it because you felt it was right, and helped you to understand something about yourself. And so I have to consider that he's like, I have to think that he will always find me. I have to think that he will always find me, that his hook of compassion is unsurpassed. that his skill is such that he will always find me somehow, just by virtue of the fact that he found me, that he called me to him and came to me. Somehow that happened. I think that's amazing. Then later on, he recognized me as the co-founder of his lineage. So that was pretty amazing too. But that wasn't the most amazing story. The most amazing story was that he found me, that his hook was so pure. Then later on, I found out that when he was a young monk, he held a relic of my predecessor, the first Ahkon Lhamo, in his hand, the kapala or skull cap of my predecessor, and which was only used at certain kinds of ceremonies. And he actually used to hold that skull cup and make prayers that he would find that incarnation sometime. Is that a love story or what? Isn't that a love story? Isn't that amazing? It's not an emotional love story. I mean, it's kind of yucky, skull cups and everything. And who knows what she looked like back then, 400 years ago? They didn't even have blow dryers then. Estee Lauder hadn't even been born. How good could she have been? They didn't even have showers. So it's not an emotional story, not in the way that you think of, but it's a confidence. It's a confidence knowing that in every lifetime, he won't let me down. He'll find me. He or some emanation of his kindness will find me. So that's pretty amazing. Now each one of you has a story like that. Once you have a teacher that is your own teacher, once you select your teacher and actually stick with your teacher, each one of you has a love story like that. Even though you may not feel that you're very personal with your teacher or very close to your teacher, there's always a love story there. There's always a beautiful story there, something very pure. But the love story is not based on emotionalism. It's based on confidence. It's based on understanding. It's based on the fact that at this point it somehow becomes reasonable to assume that in the midst of all this suffering, something pure and miraculous has appeared in your life. And that due to that, you can, if you choose, practice Dharma sufficiently to be able to achieve result, and therefore be able to return again and again in order to benefit sentient beings. That's the basis of devotion. Now you have a tool to love others with. Now you have something that you can offer. So it's a love story, but not the kind you wanted, the kind you need. You should think of it in that way. Remember that as concerns devotion, it doesn't matter how you feel. I mean, it's nice and it's sweet if you see your guru and you love him or her. You love them so much. If that's there and it sustains itself, that's sweet. That's the best. That's the best. But if it doesn't happen that way, it doesn't matter. Because that's not the truth of the relationship. That comes and goes. I'll tell you something about this great love story between myself and Painter Rinpoche. If, and I can't imagine this is a big if he were an ordinary man, we probably wouldn't get along very well. He has a very different personality than mine in some ways. He comes from a part of Tibet where people are very stern and they don't smile very much. And he's extremely wrathful. He's practiced all these wrathful deities. And when he takes you close as a student, he's extremely wrathful to you. You know that he loves you when he really is wrathful towards you on a regular basis. And I'm talking about this guy, when he gets wrathful, he's very, very good at it. And he loves me very much. And so when I know that he's coming to visit me again, I'm like, I'm so glad to see you. Because I know that the you-know-what is about to hit the fan again. But that's his nature. And that doesn't matter. That really doesn't matter. So I feel that for me, he is precious to me because he enabled me to be of benefit to you in some way. And that's more precious than anything else could be on this earth. You see that, don't you? It's the only thing that's worth anything. What else is there? In a sense, he's like the way that I can reach my children, the door that I can reach through. He provides that. So, anyway, without going on and waxing eloquent, getting emotional when I told you that wasn't legal, I will end today's class. So I hope that you will use this teaching and have it really benefit you, really put things in perspective. And to that student who wrote me that note, may he or she be listening. And may all my students think it was meant just for them.